and welcome to the SciFest Movie Talk episode. So in this episode, I will be discussing the 2009 action sequel, Fast and Furious, or as it is also known as Fast and Furious 4, which, as that name might suggest, is the fourth entry into the Fast and Furious franchise. This time again directed by Justin Lin, following his directorial debut with the franchise with the 2006 movie The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift. So, as per the other reviews in this series, as a disclaimer, I may give some spoilers for this film and others in the franchise. So please do switch off now if you don't want to hear any plot details for these films at all. But please do come back when you have watched the films and let me know what you thought, as I am always absolutely keen to know. And certainly with these, they are some very divisive films, I must say. But here we go. So, you ready? This movie actually officially acts as a direct sequel to the first movie in real terms, but doesn't seek to kind of retcon the second or the third installments. Its connection to them isn't directly clear, and watching this movie in release order can be somewhat confusing if you haven't seen later entries. The fact that this is technically a prequel to the third movie is never explored. Just a fleeting comment, which was kind of meant to pique our interest, so to speak, as it were. In terms of a timeline, it's when this series gets a little bit more complicated. But if you bear with it in the later entries in the franchise, then it does become clearer. So, and it does kind of slot this one into place quite well, I might add. And it does that for the third one too. So, when this film came out, there was indeed a lot of confusion and more questions about its cast of characters than it really did answer, you know. But now, as this is now resolved in the context of the franchise as a whole, I will choose to ignore this movie's shortcomings in that respect. Okay, now I know its place in the world. Specifically then, this movie does reintroduce a number of cast members from the first movie, principally Dominic Toretto, as played by Vin Diesel, and Brian O'Connor, as played by Paul Walker, who now feature together for the first time again in the series since actually appearing in the first movie. We then catch up with Dominic, or Dom, as he likes to be known, still on the run from the law in this episode, pulling tanker heists in the Dominican Republic. But after one of his team are murdered, namely his girlfriend Letty, as played by Michelle Rodriguez, he then goes on a mission to claim revenge against those responsible. Separately, we also catch up with Brian, who has been reinstated as a law officer and now works on a specialised FBI drug task force, looking to bring down the notorious head of a drug cartel bringing drugs into the US from Mexico, Artur Braga, as played by John Ortiz. Coming from two different angles, both Dom and Brian end up in each other's crosshairs. Rivals at first, they must then learn to overcome their resentment, if you like, anguish and distrust that they have, forged during those events which occurred in the first movie, to find a way to bring Braga down for good and ultimately get what they both want. So, this movie sets off in spectacular fashion. We have a mind-blowing heist gone wrong on the beaten and mountainous roads of the Dominican Republic, quickly reintroducing us to both Dom and Letty along with their new team, including a familiar face from the third movie, Han Lu, as played by Sung Kang, and even Dom's sister, Mia Toretto, as played by Jordana Brewster, who we last caught up with again in the first movie. So you can see where this one came from, yes? Setting us up for one thrilling entry in the series. It felt punchy with a real exotic feel and seemed like we were going to get back to the roots of this franchise. A number of the original cast members return. Absolutely thrilling stuff. Then, they take the movie down a dark route, harrowingly, I still can't say it, motivationally, so it's kind of to set up Dom's quest for vengeance and give a rationale for why he would then bump into Brian once again. And this is where the film kind of lingers in its own kind of pit of despair and never kind of really climbs back out, not really feeling particularly well paced as a result. what should have been the highlight, having the franchise bring us such a great ensemble once again, fell fairly flat and ended up feeling too melancholy, brooding over its own sense of being and totally dramatic, melodramatic too, and dramatic, taking far too long to bring us back to those elements of this franchise that we had come to love. I'm not going to lie, I still enjoy the movie for what it is, and for that it brings, and for what it brings to the franchise, but it is probably the one I do revisit the least. It doesn't have that same sense of fun that the other movies had. In its attempt, to bring us a more serious plot, I do think it lost some of the magic along the way. Once it takes its dark turn, it never truly recovers from it, The plot itself is also very thin. I mean, even for movies in this franchise, I mean, when you think about it, it is pretty much the same premise as the second movie, Too Fast, Too Furious, with racers having to compete to gain a place on the driving team for a drug lord. Very familiar, indeed. The only thing that really makes this different in this respect is Braga himself. Although somewhat underused, he is still quite an imposing villain in this one, with enough bravado, I think, to carry the role and add an interesting slant to kind of an otherwise kind of fairly recycled story. But having the original cast return, especially seeing Dom and Brian back on the screen together, is still a real treat. I mean, alright, it takes a while, too long, if you ask me, for them to kind of rekindle their bromance once again. But when you do, and when they do that, you can once again sense that chemistry start to spark. And that's kind of what this is. The film is also notable for the introduction of Giselle Yazar, as played by Gal Gadot. A role that would be further developed in the next two installments, and indeed one which would come to have a more prominent impact, if you like, on the direction of Han's character. Additionally, Lynn's direction is spot on, adding some fantastic depth to the characters, along some sides, some stunning cinematography, and some fantastic raw adrenaline-filled action set pieces. You do get the feeling, after his starter for 10 with Tokyo Drift, there is an element of Lynn learning how to kind of place these already established characters back into the series, and indeed working out now, I think, to where to take them forward. Overall, I do feel like I have been a bit hard on this film, but in all fairness for me, it is pretty much one of the dullest entries in the series, so I did have to reflect that here, But I still have fun with it. For what it is not remarkable in any significant way. The other entries in the franchise, don't do better. It is quite droll in its execution. But, hey, it gets Dom and Brian back together and ignites that spark that literally saw the franchise take off, It is a very kind of personal film for the characters, I think. And in that I can appreciate, and really, once it does stop feeling sorry for itself, it does have some pretty decent action sequences. I mean, there's some pretty high-octane moments as we race through a mountain, through the tunnels in a mountain to cross the Mexico-US border. And indeed, some pretty tense moments during that final act too. It just doesn't have that fun element that the previous movies in the franchise had, regardless of the stakes, and I think that's what keeps this one feeling great and fairly downbeat, and that's the kind of feeling you get trudging through the treacle. It certainly works at its best when Dom and Brian are back on that same team once again. This just takes too long to achieve, which leaves the film feeling sluggish and then rushed at the end as we try and fit everything into that last and final act. It is quite the serious movie, but stylish, I must admit. Certainly in the way that it is kind of being directed, and indeed still has a few tricks up its sleeve. It also teases just enough to whet your appetite for what is about to come next. And believe me, it is worth it. Like a fine engine revving up. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at Sci-First Movie Talk, and definitely love to have you back. But most of all, just thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.